Welcome to another edition of Head On here on Shaw TV. I'm Ian Holmes, examining the issues that really matter here on Mid-Vancouver Island. Very excited to have in studio for a one-on-one Bill McKay, the Mayor of Nanaimo. There's a couple of huge issues that are really going on right now in Nanaimo that we're going to get into some detail here. Colliery Dams is one, and also an upcoming core services review that the city is really going to delve into coming up here over the next month or so, and a couple other issues that we'll get into as well. Bill McKay, thanks so much for making some time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're on council last session. Now here you are as mayor. Quite a decisive victory in November, nearly 4 months into office in a 4-year term. Your initial impressions of you envisioned being mayor, now you are. How has that role shifting from council to mayor gone for you personally so far, Bill?
Well, I got to tell you, first off, I love the job, and if I didn't like people, I wouldn't love the job. I really do enjoy meeting people. That's part of it. It is a very different role being the mayor. You get a lot more information. You have a lot more. You're required to share a lot more of your vision, but you have to be careful that your vision matches that of your council. That's where it can be a wee bit of a struggle. Forming a group, imagine, if you will, that you had 11 lawyers or 9 lawyers that owned a law office, and they needed to deal with issues relative to the operation of their business. While they do very well independently in court, and they're strong and they're assertive people, putting those people together in a room to try and make decisions corporately can be somewhat of a challenge at times. That's what we're dealing with right now. I'd say honeymoon's over. We're going through a wee bit of a storming stage as we form our group, but I'm fine with it. It's getting there.
5 new faces on council, and we talked about the issues, Colliery Dams Core Services Review. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes, but you're bringing all these new faces literally thrown into the fire, especially this Colliery Dams debate. You have the experience with city staff that are pretty in tune on the issue, and you have these new councillors, a new group essentially working together on a big issue like Colliery Dams. How do you feel that you guys have been able to come together and dig into some pretty serious issues right off the bat here, Bill?
Well, I don't know if we've come together. There seemed to be some divisiveness on council as to how to approach this. I feel for the folks that are coming in now. We've got 6 people with new jobs on council, including myself, in new roles. It's a lot of information. I guess one of the challenges I'm having with Colliery right now is that I'd really like to start hearing from the community as a whole. If you look at council Monday night, there was one group and 9 representatives coming from one perspective. I'd really like to hear more of what the community at large has to say about it.
And on Colliery, the province essentially saying, hey, March 27th, we want a remediation plan for the 2 dams, especially the lower Colliery Dam. We want a plan and a timeline in place. And the most recent council meeting, you guys didn't work towards that. Bill, where do you feel that you guys need to do to get yourselves in a position where you can move forward and get a final resolution on the Colliery Dams?
Well, I think we need to clarify. The folks that put the motion forward, motion we voted on the other night, while I didn't agree with it and didn't vote in favor of it because it didn't specifically address the requirements and the directive we've been given by the Dam Safety Branch, it's not a stop. There is movement forward. It calls for a reestablishment of the technical committee. We've got some challenges with that because Nanaimo First Nations, for example, have said they don't want to go rehash this whole process. Decision was made last July, and it's time to get on with your business.
And you have talk also of being open to litigation, Bill. Is there any, has the city's legal team looked into that for being opening yourselves up that way, should something, God forbid, happen with the Colliery Dams?
Well, we're not completely following the directive of the regulator here, Dam Safety Branch, and there's often consequences to not doing that. I expect there will be consequences. What they might be, we have to leave that up to the Controller of Water Rights and his department, and perhaps even the minister to determine what those consequences are going to be.
You mentioned the minister. I was going to ask you about that. So this falls under Natural Resources Minister Steve Thompson. Have there been face-to-face meetings with the minister and staff from the city, yourself perhaps? What's happened on that directive? Because I mean, ultimately they're calling for a remediation plan here, and that hasn't happened yet. Has there been anything on that side of things, a direct meeting between those two parties?
I've reached out to the minister and asked for a meeting. To date, he's not responded with positively that he would accept a meeting. I think they were very curious and interested to see what the result of Monday night's council meeting would be, and they also want to see what the other opportunities are for them to ensure that we're following the directive between now and the 27th. I don't expect if he's not open to a conversation with us that might not happen until after the expiry date of March 27th happens.
You mentioned, Bill, that you're looking for a more cross-section of the community to weigh in here on Colliery dams. The Preservation Society has obviously made their voices heard on this. Are people tired of the issue? I know people aren't tired of the millions of dollars being spent, but does the wider community really have a huge stake in the Colliery dams? That's what you're hoping to hear from, but do you sense that is out there in the community?
I do, and that's who I would like to have more of a conversation with, even if it's just information and how they're feeling on it. We got to remember, we've spent about $2.3 million so far on this project, and that's to explore and peel back the layers to determine exactly what it is that they want us to do, what those dams look like structurally. We've done all that. It's the first time it's been done in British Columbia, and we're really setting some, it's new ground. There's over 1,300 of these dams in British Columbia, some of them big, some of them small. And it's the first time this exercise has ever gone ahead. As Nanaimo's got 9 dams, we better make sure that we do this one right. So that's why we've been so cautious about exploring, getting engineers' report, understanding completely what the ministry is looking for from us with respect to these dams. It's all new ground.
The whole trust issue, Bill, going back a few years when the city came out and decided in camera, hey, we're going to take out the dams, we're going to renaturalize the Chase River and patch up the area over time. Had those wounds closed up, do you feel, or do you feel that there's still maybe a little mistrust between City of Nanaimo staff and also members of the community in the scope of this entire process moving forward, Bill?
Well, for myself, I really believe that I don't have any issues with trust. But we made a decision in October of 2012 to do something based on the information that we had at the time. Mm-hmm. And we have to remember that there are, when it comes to recreational dams, what was recommended to us by Remove and Renaturalize is the approach that's being taken all across North America. There's only 2 cities in Canada that I'm aware of that are even considering either retaining or rebuilding recreational dams, and there's us and Moose Jaw. They're in the process of spending about $5 million to rebuild a dam in the center of their community. And we're the only ones that are doing it. So with the information we had, we made a decision. The more information we got, we made some different decisions. But all of those processes, they take time. And I believe that we made the best decision we could at the time based on the information we had. As we find out more, this situation right now, there's lots of people arguing about whether or not there's going to be this extreme weather event and the dams are not going to be able to handle it. We're not dealing with that. We're dealing with regulations. Dam Safety Branch has said that those dams, based on your engineer's calculations, must be able to pass 143 cubic meters of water per second. Right now, they've got a capacity of 55. What are you going to do about it? It's pretty simple stuff. They don't want to talk about whether the event will or will not happen. Mm-hmm. It's like the building code. They don't care. The regulator doesn't care whether you want to argue with them about their requirements. Those are their requirements. That's where we're at.
And by the city council stalling the way that it's been happening here, Bill, is the city opening itself up to the province, the ministry, deciding how the remediation work is handled in an issue you guys have been spending a lot of money and time and effort delving into over the last couple of years here.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm fearful of. If we don't play ball with Dam Safety Branch, they may very well come down on us with either fines. They might come down with remedial action. They might tell us to empty them. There's a whole myriad of things that they can do The question is whether or not they're prepared to do it. I'm not. I don't want to be defiant of them. I'd rather work with them and come up with solutions.
So what's going to be the next step on this one from council's perspective, Bill?
Well, as it stands right now, we have to act on the motion that was passed the other night, and then wait to see what dam safety says. Dam safety, they're going to, clearly, we're not meeting their deadline of giving them a plan of remediation. Therefore, they're going to have to make a decision. What that decision might be, I can't second guess what the regulator's going to say.
And that motion by Gord Fuller includes the water flow and volume surveillance plan, which is what Ted Swaby said, hey, this is something that the province is not going to deem as actual remediation work. So based on that, you mentioned you're going to move forward on the motion, but something has to happen beyond that.
Well, we got to remember that once a motion is passed by council, council owns it. So in this particular case, we have to act on that. So the majority of council have said, no, we're not going to do what the dam safety branch wants us to do at this particular point in time. We're going to do this instead. The consequences of that have yet to be determined by the regulator.
Much more on this story as we move ahead here, Bill. There's certainly a very interesting issue, and we'll continue tracking Colliery Dam. So we'll take a quick break. On the other side, very interesting discussion coming up here on the upcoming core services review process that the city is embarking on. Much more on Head On here on Shaw TV with Mayor Bill McKay right after this. Ian Holmes back on Head On here on Shaw TV in conversation with Nanaimo Mayor Bill McKay as we shift into the core services review. Now, the city is moving ahead with this project to get the terms of reference figured out all in a bid to try to run a more efficient, potentially save some money operation. Bill, let's talk about this gentleman you brought in, Dr. Roshan Dinesh. He's a conflict resolution innovator, educator, lawyer as well. He's going to help define the terms of reference before the city moves forward, Bill?
Correct. So what he's proposing is one-on-one interviews with council members to find out what their vision is of what the core review is going to look like and what each individual councillor has for goals. That's the first part. Then the second, he's going to marry all that information together and sit down with council and start devising what an RFP would look like for people to bid on. You can't go to Staples and buy one of these. You've got to build it yourself.
And what is your interpretation of core services review when you have that interview with Dr. Dinesh? What will you give us an idea, or to our viewers, about what you'll tell him about what you see as a core services review and what you hope it potentially accomplishes?
Well, a core services review is basically a report card. It tells you where you're at this point in time. It's a snapshot picture. Now, once you've determined what services you need to provide statutorily and electively, we've got a lot of services we provide in Nanaimo because we've chosen to. The next question is, how many resources do you want to put towards each of those services? Dollars. We've got folks coming to us all the time saying, well, if you want us to accomplish this much work, it just went up 8.5%, as we found a couple of years ago with the RCMP. That's a big hit on a $20 million contract. Next one is, how do you want to provide those services? Do you want to have your own police force instead of using the RCMP? Do you want to have different types of service delivery for things like sports and recreation? Those sorts of things. So a lot of folks believe that this is just it's a burn and pillage sort of approach. It's not. It's a close examination of how you conduct yourself and how you deliver services.
I think a lot of people in the community support this process, Bill. A lot of typical city budgets, it's sort of a build up year after year. This is what we had last year. We're going to add this project, so we're going to add this little dollar amount, and it seems that less is being taken away and more is just being added and piled on, and you add more work and potentially more staff as the community continues to grow. That's sort of, it would appear, from my opinion, that's something that definitely needs to be examined, and that's a lot what this has to do with, right, Bill?
Sure, absolutely. When I look at other communities that have done it, where it gets really interesting is once you've got this report card, and they might have some ideas in there as to how you might consider alternative service delivery models. Some of those will be in there, but it's basically just an observation of you. Now, once you've got the report card, now the council then has to decide how they're going to deal with that report card. When somebody says to you, you're doing very well over here, but you've got lots of room for improvement here based on other models that we've seen before, how you deal with that is up to you. That's where the rubber hits the road, is when you start having the conversation, once you've got your report, with your community and with council to determine where do you want to cut, do you want to cut, do you want to expand some services. That's where it really, you start really finding out the intestinal fortitude of your council. What we've seen in a number of jurisdictions is that once the core review's done, everybody said, oh my God, here's our opportunity to make significant changes, and then they couldn't follow through because they didn't have the guts to.
Alternative service delivery, you mentioned that, Bill.
Yes.
What are some examples of that where Nanaimo maybe does something one way and another community perhaps does another way, perhaps more efficiently?
Well, in my 3 years on council, I met with the mayor of Langford, Stu Young, for at least 3 times. And we used to have conversations, and I would ask him point blank, how come at your recreation complex you earn money from that? And we have one that looks similar, at least in my mind, that we have to subsidize for $2.3 million a year.
Bevan Park.
Bevan Park. And he came back to me and he said, first thing, we don't own anything. Most of the items that we're talking about, their services, they actually purchase services from independent operators. So for example, their hockey rink that they have is owned by an independent corporation. They rent services from them, plus they also have folks buying directly from them. So instead of somebody coming to me to rent ice time, coming to the city to rent ice time, they go to the private operator and rent ice time from them. Same models used in Maple Ridge, for example. They closed down the Cam Neely Arena. They purchased services from an independent operator who actually built 3 sheets of ice, built a better facility than what they had. We need to start looking at some of those. Another way you can deliver services is with social enterprise. A couple of examples. Port Theatre. Port Theatre takes it constantly, you know, it's kind of our local whipping boy, if you will. It's a great facility. We own it. City of Nanaimo owns it. And we don't have one city employee in that building. We don't have to look after anything with it other than provide a budget, if you will. We provide the Port Theatre Society, who look after the building, they contribute to its maintenance, and they contribute to its long-term capital plan. That's a great, and they do all of the programming in that building. We don't have to even touch it. So there's a social enterprise that's operating a building on our behalf. It's one model. I think it works great. When we look at the subsidies required, if you will, it's not subsidy, it's a management contract for them. If we look at that, it works out to about $5.50 per capita. If you look at our hockey rinks, they cost us somewhere around $16 per capita. That's for every man, woman, and child. Our swimming pools cost us $45 to $65. When I look at our swimming pools, if we take that at, let's say, $25 per swimming pool, you look over at Langford and their new pool, their per capita contribution is $13 and it's brand new.
Well, that's pretty incredible, and I definitely want to take some of my own time to look into that, see the model. It's I know it's kind of relatively new to us. I just hear those numbers, and they're mind-boggling.
Sure they are.
And I guess this is part of the process about, hey, let's open up our minds, let's learn a little bit more about potential ways to run a much more efficient operation. Maybe at the end of the day, a few people may not like it in terms of maybe some jobs may be cut potentially. We don't know that yet, but we have to find out. We'll never know unless we investigate what's out there.
Sure. We have to know that there be no layoffs through any of the results of the core review. We've got obligations to our employees, and those
are contracts with CUPE. Those
absolutely
can't be axed.
Sure.
Right, to be clear.
And we want to have them involved at have the unions involved at some point during the process. one of the things that's so good about a core review is that so often we see communities, particularly in the United States, where we've got really good examples of communities whose back was against the wall and they were facing bankruptcy. Now, you normally can't do that in Canada, but you can learn from some of the lessons that they can provide on how they had to change their model and change the way they do things simply for their own survival. In our case, we can learn from them. They've got some great examples out there.
So just to clarify on the QP angle, there's no jobs lost will be lost through this process?
You can't. No, I mean, I'm a firm believer. I was involved in unions in my life, and I was a card-carrying member for many, many years. In fact, I was an activist at a certain point in my life. You've got to treat your people properly. You can't slash and cut and burn. That's not what this is all about. It's about providing good jobs. It's about providing maybe some new service delivery models that will phase out of. Maybe some people will end up with different jobs. In the case of Maple Ridge, they closed down a civic facility in place of a public-private partnership. Nobody lost their jobs during that process.
Reallocations or
absolutely
different ways
reallocations, certainly. But these are models that we have to start looking at. The other thing we have to get into more of is partnerships with a social enterprise and with other people with resources. So, for example, are there any projects we can do with Nanaimo? Are there any projects we can do with the university and the school district where we can pool our resources that we have and do projects together? Sports facilities, for example, there's the first one that comes to mind. Can we build a new football, a new football stadium and a new facility using resources that we have, the school district and the university? How neat would that be to be able to build a new facility where everybody's participating in it?
And quickly, Bill, when do you hope to have the core services review complete?
Oh my goodness, it all depends on how much work we ask them to do. I expect that we're not going to see this thing even get to the point where we're going to RFP until perhaps end of May. That would put us closer to the end of the year. We were hoping to have it done by September so we could get into budget talks next year. Probably not. One thing we have committed on the core services review is that we cannot engage in any new services while the core review is underway.
Very fascinating stuff, Bill.
Yeah.
Something a little lighter on the other side of the break. We'll wrap up the program, talk a little bit about food trucks and their potential arrival to Nanaimo, on-street food trucks, right after this on Head On here on Shaw. All right, we got a few more minutes here on Head On Shaw TV. Ian Holmes in conversation with Bill McKay, Mayor of Nanaimo. We got the heavy hitters out of the way, Colliery dams, and also the core services review. Now, something that has generated a lot of talk locally, and it got some insight from Greater Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce CEO Kim Smythe. He says he's never heard so much feedback from his local media columns that he does on opening up the on-street food truck market in Nanaimo, and city is now investigating this. So this could be maybe a mini version of what we have in Vancouver or Victoria. Bill, what is your take on the potential arrival of an increasingly popular food delivery?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited because some of the food you get from some of these vendors, it's absolutely amazing. I was at a wedding, if you can believe it, in Vancouver, and they got poutine at 10 o'clock in the evening delivered from a company called Mean Poutine. They're normally down on Granville Street. And they came in with this poutine, and I said, oh, what the heck, poutine, really? It was unbelievable. I've never tasted anything like that in my life. So I'm really excited. I also want to look over at the model that they have in North Vancouver, where they have a facility that's very, very similar to Diana Krall. And on Friday nights, every Friday night, they have a band, and they have half a dozen food trucks lined up. People go down there for dinner. There's a new pub located right next door. It's a high energy place because there's people there. And so that's what I think is going to be really good about the whole food truck.
Interesting dynamic in Nanaimo. It doesn't have the huge pedestrian heavy areas like Vancouver and Victoria's harborfront. So yeah, I guess they're going to have to, the city's going to have to try to strike a balance when making this on-street food truck policy to have it where it can be sustainable for the operators and not also hurt the traditional restaurants. I'm sure location of where these things go will have to be pretty important, a balancing act there, Bill, in putting in such a policy.
Oh, I agree, and we don't have the critical mass in Nanaimo. However, the more interest you get in the locations you've got these food trucks, festivals and so on and so forth might be a good start for us, but the more interest you have and the more variety you have, all of a sudden that district becomes a destination for eating. So I hope that our restaurants aren't going to feel like somebody's competing with them because they don't have a brick and mortar store. More product you have available, people now all of a sudden realize that you're the place to go to have something to eat. They might not even know what they're after on their way down there.
I think Nanaimo does have somewhat of an advantage with event season. We have a 6-week stretch here where there's a lot of events going on weekends. The weather's generally very nice. It may be more of a hit seasonally, if you will, but that's something you talked about. You know, the downtown waterfront walkway area does bring in a lot of people, and like you said, you can build on that by food trucks. People, foodies these days, this is what they want, to eat that high quality type of food. And I think I'm with you, Bill. I think it would draw in a certain crowd and bring them in as opposed to detracting from traditional restaurants.
Well, I agree. And one of the things we have to do is we have to remember that this is not a fad. This is a viable vendor who's got costs and who has risks. So what our responsibility is to ensure that every business in Nanaimo has the opportunity to flourish. We need to give them that business environment to operate in. So that's what I'm hoping this would be a good example of. And in fact, I think we need to take a look at our busker bylaw as well. Same thing, it's an outdoor activity where people congregate. We need to start growing up with some of the best examples that are out there. I've been told with busking, the best model some of our buskers have ever seen is the TransLink model over in Vancouver. They're very, very pleased with it, and it creates good opportunities for them. That's what we're about, is providing the opportunities.
And just to clarify for our viewers, the city does have, through park leases in very restricted areas, food trucks, but the city's looking to have a blanket permit process to have it in more on-street areas, essentially opening up to more areas as opposed to just certain park spaces at certain times of the year. Bill, that's all the time we have. Thanks so much for coming in. Really appreciate your insight. It's nice to have our first one-on-one here on Head On to get into the issues, some important ones, and also a lighter fare there, if you will, with the food trucks. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
That is Bill McKay, the mayor of Nanaimo. Really appreciate him coming in to get some insight on some pretty key issues going on in the city of Nanaimo. I'm Ian Holmes. This is Head On Shaw TV. Thanks so much for tuning in.